Hey guys, it's Danny. Welcome back to the tent. We are going to be reading, I'm so excited. We are going to be reading my favorite book of the Bible this month, and that is the book of Jonah. Now, don't freak out. It's a commitment to read an entire book, but the book of Jonah is not that big of a commitment. The book of Jonah in my Bible is 3 pages long. In some Bibles, it is 2 pages long. It consists of 4 very small but powerful chapters jam-packed with amazing information. I always joke with my mom that Jonás no le hizo caso a la palabra de Dios y vino un pez muy grande y swum, se lo comió. Porque Jonás no le hizo caso a la palabra de Dios. That was a song that I heard sung in Sunday school forever. And growing up, I avoided the book of Jonah because I felt I knew the story. Jonah was told to do something. He didn't do it. He was punished and he was eaten by a big fish. And that's the end of the story. VeggieTales taught us that. But as a grown-up, like 28, I reread the book of Jonah, and it automatically became my favorite book of the Bible. It is filled with so much power, so much presence of God, so much responsibility thrusted upon the believer, so much mercy thrusted upon God's throne. It's beautiful. It's short. Like me. I'm kidding. Anyway, so we are going to start with Jonah chapter 1 today. So grab a Bible, grab something to write with, and we'll get started. One thing I need you to understand, we need to get rid of preconceived notions. First of all, Jonah was not a bad guy. Jonah was actually a believer, and not only was he a believer, he was a prophet. If you don't know what a prophet is basically someone that God chose to be the vessel in which to communicate. I'm going to speak to you, and you are going to tell my people what to do and how to live their lives. Another misconception is that the story of Jonah and the book of Jonah, a lot of people think it's about a big fish. And it is. I mean, the big fish does make an appearance, but that's really only like a handful of verses out of the entire book. And for a book that's very, very small, it's really not that many verses. The book of Jonah is not so much a story of a big fish as much as it is a story about a man who is running from God. But he's not running from God because of God's wrath or because of fear of God. We learn as we continue to read on that his motives for running from God are not what we would expect. In these 3 pages, in these 4 chapters, we will see a man, a believer, someone who gets to have direct communication with the Father. He will flee from God. He will cry out to God. He will eventually obey God, and he will end with being angry at God. You know, Jonah was a believer and a prophet, and he was called to be a prophet in the 8th century BC. This book is not only an amazing story of a man who didn't pay attention, it is a candid look at what the life of ministry looks like and what ministers look like sometimes. Jonah is a book that may challenge us to see the ministry and those called to it. So grab a book, grab a Bible, not just any book, grab a Bible, grab a pen, and grab something to write with because it's always good to take notes. And Sister Danny has a lot of information today. So we are going to be starting on Jonah chapter 1, verse 1. Jam-packed with information. Now you're going to see that chapter 1 is only 17 verses, but so much to learn, so much to say, so much to infer, so much prior knowledge that we can apply here. So here we go. In my Bible, it is titled Jonah's Flight. So we have fight or flight responses, and this dude flew. So Jonah's flight. Verse 1. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh, and preach against it, because their evil has come up before me. Okay. Stopping there already. There is a major theme in the Bible that the word of the Lord is truth. God did not just stop by and talk to these prophets to hang out like, hey, Jonah, what's up? Just up here hanging out with the angel Gabriel. Like, he didn't do that. If he was going to come and deliver a message to these prophets, their instructions would set something into motion to fulfill God's plans, right? So if God is stopping by and saying, get up and go to the great city of Nineveh, it is for a reason. Now, we need to talk about this great city of Nineveh. Now, when he says the great city of Nineveh, he isn't so much talking about, how do I say this? The city wasn't that great. Great city could imply the size of the city, which then again was also not that big. It was about a 3-mile circumference. But the size of the city in terms of its history, of its cultural richness, this city had been established back in Genesis chapter 10. And it was established by a dude named Nimrod. My seminary's coming out. I'm sorry. You don't need to know all this. But if you're interested, it was established by a dude named Nimrod. And it is one of the cruelest cities, groups of people you done ever heard of. And theologians, historians, and scholars all would agree with me. For a very, very long time, actually, an interesting tidbit, for a long time, scholars would discredit the Bible because of cities like Nineveh. So because they could never find actual proof that the city of Nineveh existed, they then said, if that doesn't exist, therefore everything in this book is a lie. Until the year 1840, where an archaeologist named Austin Henry, he actually found the city of Nineveh close to what is modern day Iraq, and they found ruins and they found artifacts, and all of those artifacts depicted, paintings and drawings and sculptures that depicted torture and violence and murder and war. And these people were very, very, very cruel and vicious, probably the most cruel and vicious people throughout history. And that's because we've experienced some mass genocides, just saying. Anyway, continuing on to verse 3. So he is being called, a prophet of God is being called to go to a horrible place. Let's see what he does. Jonah 3. Jonah got up to flee to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. So he is running. Instead of going to Nineveh, he is trying to go to a place called Tarshish. To do so, he hops on a boat in the city of Joppa. So Joppa, my seminary is coming out again. Joppa is located out east, close to the Mediterranean coast, whereas Tarshish is out west, which as west as he could have possibly gotten at that point in time without, technological means of travel. And that would have been, a port somewhere around modern day Spain. So he was trying to get as far away from Nineveh and the Lord as possible. He was running from God. So picking up in verse 4. But the Lord threw a great wind onto the sea. He might be running, but God is chasing right after him. And such a great storm arose on the sea that the ship threatened to break apart. So this was hardcore. This was a rocking and a rolling. Verse 5, the sailors were afraid and they cried out to their God. So that seems like such a simple verse. But have you ever seen those TV shows of like Alaskan fishermen and all the crazy things they have to experience? Fishermen don't scare easy. Sailors do not scare easy. So we have to understand this in the context that if they were afraid, this must have been really, really bad. Let's continue on. They were afraid and they cried out to his God. They threw the ship's cargo into the sea to lighten the load. Meanwhile, Jonah had gone down to the lowest part of the vessel and had stretched out and fallen into a deep sleep. So the men are so afraid. They're on this boat and they're moving cargo. That's their job. And they are so afraid that they're actually throwing the cargo. The very reason they are traveling, they're throwing it overboard to lighten the load. And what can we learn from this? God uses storms. God uses hardships. God uses, turbulence to show us, where we put our faith. They were each crying out to gods that were not the one true God. But also to teach us what really matters in life. In that moment, the cargo was not the most important thing. Saving themselves their fellow man was the most important thing. But where is Jonah during all of this? So Jonah is deep at the bottom of the vessel and he is fast asleep. And you might be thinking, everyone's freaking out. How is he asleep? Some scholars believe that the Lord put him to sleep. I believe, and other scholars believe, have you ever just been so over it? You know, maybe it's your husband, maybe it's your mom, maybe it's your kids, and they're picking and they're picking and they're picking, your friends, your boyfriend, and you just want to get away. You just want to get away, and you don't want to deal with it anymore. You don't want to look at them. You don't want to see them. And this is where Jonah is with God. God is trying to get in Jonah's face, and Jonah's just like, I just need to get away from you right now. And so he goes into the bottom of the ship, and he gets away from the storm, and he gets away from the sailors, and he gets away from God, and he just goes to sleep because he doesn't want to deal with it. Jonah has shut down. So we're going to pick up again at verse 6. The captain approached him and said, "What are you doing sound asleep?" "Come on," the sailors said to each other. "Let's cast lots. Then we'll know who is to blame for the trouble that we're in." So they cast lots, and the lot singled out Jonah. Then they said to him, "Tell us who is to blame for this trouble that we're in. What is your business and where are you from? What is your country and what people are you from?" So the use of lots, so casting lots would have been kind of like throwing dice or something along those lines. So the use of lots was permitted by God in the Old Testament, and we see examples of it in the book of Levi, the book of First Chronicles, Acts, even Joshua. And God would allow it for certain purposes. Now, it was used for like gaming purposes, but it was also used in other religions. But God would sometimes use it to his own accord. We see God's power over nature, God's power over everything. So if God wanted to use the lots, to send a message out to these sailors, he definitely could, and he definitely did. The lots singled out that weird dude that was sleeping at the bottom of the boat, Jonah. And they approach him and they say, "What is your business? Where are you from? What is going on? Why is this your fault?" And Jonah does not lie. So we are in verse 9. He answered them, "I am a Hebrew. I worship the Lord, the God of the heavens, who made the sea and the dry land." First of all, by stating I am a Hebrew, he's saying, I have a different God than you. And my God is the God of heavens and the sea and the dry land. What that tells me is that Jonah knew better. Jonah knew my God is the most powerful God. He's the dude that made the heavens, and he made the earth, and he made the waters, and he made the skies, and I'm running from him. Not the smartest thing. Let's keep reading verse 10. And then the men were seized by a great fear and said to him, "What is this that you've done?" The men knew he was fleeing from the Lord's presence because he had told them. So they said to him, "What should we do so that the sea will calm down for us? For the sea is getting worse and worse." He answered them, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea so that it will calm for you. For I know that I am to blame for this great storm that is against you." Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to try to get back to dry land, but they couldn't because the sea was raging against them more and more. So let's look at that. They're saying, what do we do? How do we stop this? How do we make God happy? How do we fix this situation? And Jonah says, you know what? Just throw me off the boat. Jonah would have rather died than to give the Ninevites the opportunity that God wanted to give them. And we're going to find out later why that is. Jonah, some people believe he was acting out of fear because he did not want to go into a place that was so cruel. But if that were the case, why would you accept suicide? Why would you just throw yourself into the sea, right? Now, here we see men, sailors, who came into the situation with different gods than Jonah. And in this moment, we see non-believers believing that the Lord would be upset if they killed a prophet. We see non-believers believing that if they repent and they do the right thing, the Lord will calm the storm for them. The book of Jonah, it is a story of unbelievers recognizing God, while the one person, the prophet, the believer, the one who should be paying attention to God, ignores him. And that's very interesting, and you're going to see this theme continue throughout. Let's continue. We're almost done. Verse 14. So they called out to the Lord. The sailors are now praying, "Please, Lord, don't let us perish because of this man's life, and don't charge us with innocent blood. For you, Lord, have done just as you pleased." Then they picked up Jonah and threw him into the sea, and the sea stopped raging. The men were seized by great fear of the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. These sailors, just by witnessing the power of God through the storm, the evidence that God was truly there when they threw Jonah and then everything stopped, right? They got the message. They understood. They even went so far as to sacrifice something, make a vow to God right then and there. Yet Jonah, who's already had all these past experiences with God, who already knew truth about God, Jonah's still stubborn. He's saying, just throw me off the boat. I'm just going to sleep down here, and I don't want to look at you, right? I'm going to run away from God. So this is the most famous part of the story, verse 17. The Lord appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. The importance of chapter 1, and this is why it's my favorite book of the Bible. There are a lot of believers out there. I know because I was one of them. There are a lot of believers out there that are sitting in their fish. There are a lot of believers out there when confronted with hardship, when confronted with things that make them uncomfortable, when confronted with their sin, when confronted with, being called by God to do something and they just don't want to do it. Instead of giving in and obeying God, they flee and they go the other direction. They run from God, much like Jonah did. And we are so quick in Sunday school to judge this guy. We are so quick to be like, oh, Jonah, if only he had listened to God, he wouldn't have sat in that fish. And as we say that, some of us are sitting in a fish right now. We're sitting in addiction. We're sitting in depression. We're sitting in anxiety. We're sitting in a failing marriage. We are sitting in miscommunication with our children. We are sitting in anger. We are sitting in guilt. We are sitting in shame and greed and pride. Fish come in all shapes and sizes, and some of us have been sitting in our fish for a very, very long time. Spoiler alert. In chapter 2, we are going to read about how Jonah eventually surrenders, and that fish throws him up. And that's powerful. It's gross, but it's powerful. How many of us, and this is a true reflection I want to leave you with, how many of you guys marked as Christians? I'm a Christian. I'm a believer. I have the crosses on my wall. I wear a crucifix around my neck. I go to church on Sunday. How many of you are sitting around and thinking, man, why is my life so horrible? Why am I so sad? Why am I so angry? Why is my marriage failing? Sometimes that's just God allowing Satan to come in and test us, or it'll make us stronger. But sometimes it's because God told us to go to Nineveh, and we've decided to go to Tarshish. And for me and my testimony, I bought a ticket to Tarshish for a long time. But the day that I decided to get my life on the right track and head to Nineveh, where I belonged, that fish threw me up. So as we read the book of Jonah, I empower you. I empower you to reflect on yourself and reflect on your life. And see if looking at Jonah is like looking in a mirror. For me, it is. And I know for a lot of other believers and a lot of other Christians out there, it can be too. So open up the book of Jonah today. Look at it. Read it over. It might look like a mirror, and it might just look like a great story about a guy that got eaten by a fish. Bye, guys.